Hi everyone, thank you very much for joining. We've got a fantastic talk tonight. Before I introduce our speaker, I'm just going to give a quick mention. One of our members, Hugh, is going to be running a session for the Cambridge Kubernetes meetup on auto-scaling features in AKS. I've added an announcement, so feel free to attend. I'm sure it'll be a great session. So we are, I'm really happy tonight to have another product team session, very sort of topical new product. Everybody's asking questions about it, so you'll get to hear about what this is and how you can use it tonight. But we're going to be talking about Microsoft's new solution, Azure Purview, and I'd like to present the Principal PM, Aashish Ramdas.
Thanks, Richard. Good evening, everyone. My name is Aashish. I'm joining you folks from Seattle. So while it's evening for you, it is morning for me. And it's the right time to be doing presentations. Thank you for joining the session. And I hope to cover something really interesting for you folks. It's a topic that has been gaining a lot of interest in the market. And it is something that is currently in public preview, so it is fresh off the boat. It has launched in public preview in December, so it hasn't even been 3 months. And so a talk around this would really bring you up to speed on the latest and greatest that is going on in this area. So without further ado, let me jump in. Okay, what all will we cover today? The first is I want to make sure that we set the right context. So I'm going to give you the framework in which we have built this product and where that comes in. We'll give you an overview of what the product is, how it works, and do a little demo so that you actually can see how the product functions. And towards the end, we'll leave some time for Q&A. This talk is going to be an what we call an L100 talk, which is it's largely going to set the problem context. It is going to talk about the personas involved, the problems that we're trying to solve, and touch upon briefly how we are planning to solve it. And we can use the Q&A section to go as deep as we want into the technical aspects, but we won't spend too much time on the technology at this point. We can have future sessions in which we cover specific technology aspects here. So feel free to pose your questions in the chat window, and we'll get to it towards the end. Okay, let's go on. All right, let's start where our customers start, which is in the sprawling world of data. As we started engaging with customers in the early stages of building the Purview product, we heard loud and clear about the need for a comprehensive data governance solution. Industry research in this space tells us that we are looking at like a never before seen volume, like the velocity and variety of data, but also put together the fact that organizations have a really hard time taking all that data and generating value out of it. So it's not just a problem of the amount of data getting generated, but we all know that data is your most strategic asset. How do you put it to good use? And if you summarize that down, it's really coming down to a question that asks, how many folks can really say you know what data you have and where your data is and where your risk exposure is, and have you really used your data well? If you think about all the data that you have in your organization, especially the larger organizations that we end up dealing with, this is a really hard question, right? Like, so if you look at some of the customers that we're dealing with, it has reached frustration levels. So solving this problem is critical for organizations to go into the next level of their data transformation. We bring in a new and more interesting persona, the Chief Data Officer. The charter of the Chief Data Officer has expanded from standard digital transformation to making this data more discoverable and to maximize business value. But to kind of get there, the chief data officers must first understand what data exists in all the places that it exists, that is where, and how to make it available to the consumers of the data across the organization in a secure and compliant way. And this little extra condition of secure and compliant just changes the game completely. So in order to do that, you have to work cross-function with the existing security and compliance organizations that most organizations have to ensure that risk is managed. So it goes from being a siloed problem of let's just find the data and make it available to people to a cross-discipline, cross-function kind of problem where making data available and doing it in a secure and compliant way suddenly becomes interesting and a hard problem to solve. Questions raised today range from the very basic, just I have no idea what I have, just what data do I have, where did it come from, to the more complex end of it, which is what is the exact risk that I'm being exposed to, which regulation is impacted, how do I control access and usage granularly, and I do it seamlessly. It makes sense because well-managed data sets are technically easier to keep secure and keep compliant. If you know exactly what you have, where you have it, and you know who exactly is supposed to use it, you can do a great job in keeping it secure and compliant, and it becomes easy. The overhead is low. And then when security and compliance is integrated into data governance, it becomes an enabler rather than like a speed bump in the process. And we all know this from the productivity side. If you give users a chance or an option to choose between security and productivity, they're going to choose productivity. That's their daily bread and butter. And this is where security becomes a speed bump in such a trade-off. Our goal is to make sure that this is not a trade-off. Organizations should not be trading off between the two. It should be both together, acting as enablers for each other. And nothing has made this clearer than the data privacy challenges that have emerged in the recent years. Certain regulations like EU GDPR, the CCPA from California, all of these have turned the security compliance aspect into a privacy aspect too. So now privacy starts to play an interesting role here. Privacy requirements now span the data management, data security world there. How do you get successful data governance? As our organizations embark on this digital transformation, well, it's clear that they're generating data from everywhere. It's from IoT devices to operational data coming from applications, analytical data coming from everywhere. And they're taking this data and modernizing and migrating as well. So they're moving some analytical functions, for example, to the cloud for scalable processing. And the data goes from there to everywhere. You have operations on premises, so the data is flowing out between on-prem to the cloud and back on-prem. So it's from everywhere to everywhere. And when I say the cloud, it's not just one cloud. It's not just Azure. We have to acknowledge it's a multi-cloud world. And really, there are a bunch of clouds out there where data flows. And the complexity not just comes from on-prem and the cloud. It is within an organization, there are business units and geographies, and certain kinds of data should not go to certain other geographies or business units. That complexity layering on it just adds up. On top of all this, what we are trying to do is empower users to take data-driven decisions, which means you must have access to the data. You must know where that data is to take it and use it and absorb it. And so you're creating, in some sense, a broad set of data consumers who need access to that data. You need to democratize the data and empowering those data consumers to get access to the data, run their insights on top of it, and then extract the value is what will drive the next wave within organizations to grow. But all of this needs to be done within regulatory boundaries, and all of this needs to be done with the right security controls in place. So you can see how this becomes challenging. And our solution to this problem, in some sense, is a product that tries to look across all of this. and gives you a single view. And that product is Azure Purview. It's meant to cover all your data sources, wherever your data is, whether it's on-premises, it's in other clouds, uh, or it is in SaaS applications. So wherever your data is, the goal is to have one single view. And so it'll help customers reimagine how data governance is done from a manual, costly, time-consuming effort to a cloud-native, purpose-built service to address data discovery, to address compliance, to address security, to address privacy, to address governance. So this is the goal of Azure Purview. And if we do the job right, then the goal is that data consumers can find data easily in a in the right way, in a compliant way, and people who are monitoring this, all the chief data officers and CISOs and compliance officers, everyone in the picture have visibility over what is happening. They're able to control what is happening and without spending time and resources on it. What do our customers do today? Which is where it all comes from. What our customers have now is usually a manual, homegrown, or some custom solution that typically does not adapt well to growing data environments. So it would have started with something that catered to what you have on-prem, and then you had data sources that appeared in the cloud, and then you're scrambling to cover those two. And then whenever there's a new requirement that comes up, your data consumers decide to pick up the latest and greatest tools out in the world. Again, you're scrambling. So this entire process is hugely costly, full of gaps because you're always catching up. There are gaps in data types, there are gaps in data sources. Just overall, it's a catch-up game, which is ideally not where you want to be. You want to be able to manage and govern operational, transactional, analytical data seamlessly. What you really don't want to be doing is managing the infrastructure for doing this. So a PaaS managed serverless solution for you just takes that problem away. And it should ideally take away the effort of maintaining any manual ad hoc solution that you would have. So that overhead goes away. So your focus is on onboarding your data, finding out what's in it, and then making it available to your consumers. So as you scale your data, that turns into certain activities, which is the automation of data discovery, whether it's on-premises, in the multi-cloud, or SaaS. Finding out what data is there, what's in your data, is classification. So to classify your data at scale, specify what sensitivity of data is there, your compliance, your industry, be able to add extra metadata in there, add business and company specific value, make it searchable, make it easy to access. And then figure out where your data flows, where data is coming from, where it is going to. Establish a sort of lineage so that you get a complete picture of what is happening with your data. If you pull back into the regulation side of it, EU GDPR requires you to know who you're sharing your data with, where it is going, what controls you have put with them. So that aspect of understanding where your data has come from, and therefore what are you responsible for as an inheritor of this data, and where your data is going to, which means what are your responsibilities when you send the data out, and what responsibility do you have to ensure on the receiver of that data. All of that it's inherited from the regulation that requires you to do these things. So lineage, in some sense, of data is super important. And so to maximize your business value, when you get this done, you understand where your data is and you know where it is flowing, and you've understood what's in your data. Now you can connect your business and technical data analysts, your data scientists, your data engineers to a trusted catalog. Now, these users can quickly find data, figure out where data is coming from, where it's going, whether they should have access to it or not, request access to it in an easy way, and they are able to get a curated and consistent glossary of terms and definitions for their organization that applies on top of this data set. So for folks that go into the data cataloging, data quality, business value, curation aspect of it, there is a ton of value that we are building here, because finally just addressing just knowing what data you have isn't enough. You have to make it available to your users, and that's what it's about. That's what we are building to. The last persona that we are kind of and the last value that we are kind of addressing is to the folks who are overseeing all of this, to gain insights on what is going on, understand at a glance how data is being created and how data is being used across your data estate. You can visually assess the state of your data assets, your scans, your glossary, your sensitive data, pick your pivot, pick your angle. You should be able to understand what's happening with your data. It's a tremendously hard problem for individual organizations to solve, especially if each one is trying to build their own custom solution. There are many things to learn from the market out there. Try and implement back becomes a multi-year effort. Our goal is to compress all of that. One solution out of the box takes care of everything for you. Now, Purview achieves all of this using a unified data map. The data map is the heart of Purview. It automates the extraction and manages the metadata at scale. And it covers your on-prem, your hybrid environment, your multiple clouds that you may have data in, basically your entire data estate. Customers can then apply classifications to the data, qualifying its business value using as many as 100 built-in classifiers. Microsoft Information Protection Sensitivity labels can also be applied to the data. And then you can also bring in your own custom classifiers. Further, the data map also understands data as it relates to each other to do the end-to-end lineage that we just mentioned. And building on top of the data map are the data catalog and data insights. The data catalog enables data consumers to find trustworthy, valuable data using an intuitive semantic search and browse experience. It's basically the thing that we are all used to now. If you want to find data, search. And within this experience, stewards can standardize business terms, definitions with the help of business glossary. Goes off into the data quality, glossary, curator, steward zone of it. But that's the business value that we're trying to enable. Now, data insights focuses on the chief data officers, compliance officers, privacy officers, security officers, and their security and compliance teams that back all of it. It gives them a bird's eye view into their data estate. And with the help of various reports, customers can now view and drill down into their data usage, figure out what sensitive data is there across their data estate, and see who's accessing what sensitive data. So again, you're starting to step into a zone where complying to a regulation is now automated. And that goes from this manual ad hoc compliance and the worry that you are not always complying to a zone where everything is automated and managed. And so you have the confidence you're doing it right. Let's take a customer. What are customers telling us? We had Andrew Eisenman, who has tried this out and has great things to say about it. Now, after being in the preview and using our service, they have seen the business impact on their users, analysts, and a path forward to governing and expanding their data estate that doesn't create anxiety. And that is where we want to be. We want to be in a place where customers see this and say, this is really what we wanted all along. Let's partner and make this better. I'm going to pause for a second, let you read the customer quote here. Okay, let's move on to the interesting bit. Let's see this in action. and then we'll come back and review what we have learned. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second as I flip to showing you the demo. Give me a second. Okay, give me a sec. Screen. All right. Okay, so what you should see now, hopefully, is a browser window. And if you can't see it, please let me know in the chat. All right, what you see is the Azure portal, portal.azure.com. And I have filtered my resources to show me the type of Purview accounts that I have. Right, so I'm going to click in the one that I have, the Purview demo. And this is where Purview, you can see, is a standard Azure resource. You create a resource, you pick a location, a bunch of properties on it, and create it. In order to get to the management of your data, you need to click on this bit that says Open Purview Studio. You can also get here by going to the address web.purview.azure.com. So this is a standard one that you can publish to your organization, and you pick your directory, pick your Purview account, and you continue, and it will authenticate you in. So you don't need to come through the Azure resource to get there. Web.purview.azure.com should help you get there correctly. Now, what you see here is the actual Purview Studio. And there are multiple entries in the left nav here. Sources, Glossary, Insights Management Center. We'll cover a few of these, and then we'll come back and see if we have more questions, and we can browse this and explore this in the Q&A timeframe. What I want to cover is the ability to register data, see what data you have in your data estate, so browsing all your assets across the data estate, see insight reports that have been generated out of it, and manage all that data. So I'm going to skip a little bit of the glossary. We'll touch upon it very briefly, but I'll skip it mostly. All right, let's start with the sources. So in the left nav there, when you click on sources, you see a map view of how your data is organized. Now, this is under your control. You can see that in my environment, what I've set up is data sources that are present in EMEA and data sources that are present in North America. Within EMEA, I have an HR department and sales department. And in the sales department, for example, I have some blob storage, some data lake, S3, and a SQL server. Now, these are your resources that you have decided to add and scan. So part of the thing, for example, is that you're allowed to organize your data as you see fit. But the goal is to make sure that all your data gets added and scanned here. Let me jump into one of them. Let's click on View Details. And you can see more information about this resource that has been added. For example, this is the blob URL, and it has one scan. You can see the details of the scan here. If you click on it, you can see more about how many assets were found, discovered, how long did it run. So you have information about what is happening on your scan itself. How long, when did the last scan run? Where is this in your data source hierarchy? So for example, this blob storage account is part of a certain resource group, which is part of a subscription. So you can now parent it from a subscription point of view, or you can organize your data sources as you see fit. So you can say, just show me all the resources that relate to my HR department, and everything shows up here. So you have the standard Azure AWS on-prem hierarchy that you wanted, or you can pivot to create your own hierarchy here. So for example, you can see that this is the source ID here, parenting up to a different resource group, parenting up to a subscription. Going in, you can see what has happened with with the run history. You can turn this around and show it as a table view if you prefer it. So you can start to see what are the sources that you have, what types, where does it come in. The collection refers to how you want to organize the data and how many scans have happened, when did that happen. So this is another view that you can use, a more flat list in some sense. Now, all this data being scanned is great, but let's look at what has happened with the data. So I'm going to jump first into insights and show you the 50,000 foot view of all that is happening. So in my data estate, as I have defined it and brought in today, I have 8 different source types. I have about 12,000 assets that have been discovered, 8,500-ish of which have actually been classified. And I have a view of where and how much data is there, like how many assets are where. So it looks like Azure Data Lake Gen 2 stores the most of my data, followed by S3, blob storage. And you have interesting ones like Power BI, Synapse Analytics, and I'll show you the list of data sources that we support. There's quite a few out there, and we are increasing that over time. You also get to see what is not associated with a resource set. Now, this is an interesting concept. If you want to jump to it, we put a pin on it and come back later. For managing data lake storage and structured storage like SQL, a resource set is a great way to aggregate things that are common. You can look at scans. You can look at how many are successful, how many are failed. This allows you to go back and look at how well you are doing in terms of analyzing your data estate, if everything is good or not. So your health of your scanning infrastructure. At the end of your scan, however, what you get to learn about is how much sensitive data do I have, measured by the classifications that have been found and the sensitivity labels that have been found. So what you can see is across 4 subscriptions, there have been 84 unique classifications, 8,500-ish files that have been classified, and 4 tables. Most of my classifications fall in these buckets: government, financial, personal, and miscellaneous. So let's dig in and see what that means. You can filter in and currently sorted by classification, but let me filter and sort and see what happens here. I'm going to see where which classification has got the most presence. So it looks like the EU national identification number is present in about 3,000 files. This is interesting. Let's dig in and see where this is. So I'm going to click on this and click on Browse Assets. Now, what this does is it filters out everything but the one classification that I was looking for. So it shows 1 to 25 out of the 2,939 results because you're filtered down to this specific classification. So you can see everything that falls in this, which is great, but I'm interested only in data that is in the Azure Blob Storage. So I'm going to filter for that. And I'm going to pick the one storage account that is there because that's all the files that are there. So it comes down to about 23 results. So this is the data. So you can start with the most high-level view, drill down, get more granular. And let me take you to the last level of granularity here. You can actually pick an asset here, and you can see the classifications on it. So each file, each table, each column gets its own view like this. So you can go right down to that level of granularity, see how it all rolls up. What's the hierarchy? This file is present in this storage container, this storage account, and if you click on the storage account, you can see which subscription it is a part of. It gives you all the properties that you're interested in, including, for example, the classifications on the asset. And if you have noticed that this is the sensitivity label. Sensitivity labels, for those who are not aware, are a concept from the Microsoft information protection world. Those who have been working with Office 365 know that you can define the sensitivity labels and apply them to documents, to emails, to SharePoint sites, to Teams channels, and a whole bunch more, all of which is available in GA on the productivity side of the world, Microsoft 365, Office 365. Now we are bringing it on to this infrastructure world for operational analytical data, transactional data. So sitting on blob storage, we have a file that is highly confidential. So this label is coming in from that side. So we are making sure you're able to leverage the existing assets that you have created and reuse that across the entire data estate. Zooming back out a little bit, these are the search results that we filtered down into. Feel free to try this out and play around with this experience. Let's go back to insights. We talked about classifications and how we are able to start from here and drill down all the way. Sensitivity labels does the same thing for you. For example, I'm able to see how many assets in here have got highly confidential Microsoft FTE. I'm going to click on this. If I do browse assets, it'll tell me exactly how many of those are there. And I can click on one of them. This is a docx file sitting in an S3 bucket, highly confidential Microsoft FTE. Yeah, sorry, Contoso FTE. Used to saying Microsoft FTE. This was insights. It takes the data that you have scanned, the data estate that you have added through sources, and turns them into something useful, presentable, aggregated at the top level here. There are more insights that we're going to add over time. There are more actions that you can do out of these insights that we're going to add over time. This is where the fun stuff is, where you start to make use of it. This is where we think most of our governance and security and compliance teams will spend time on getting insights out of what data has already been scanned. Now, let's quickly look at the management center and look at all the things that you can manage. Data sources refers back to the sources page now. Scan rules sets tells you how to scan your data. So the rules that define what scanning should be done is here. Integration runtimes refer to how is it that we are able to scan your data. Now, I'm going to spend like a minute here to talk about the various types that are there. One is a Microsoft managed runtime where we manage the scanning infrastructure for you. You don't have to do anything, just have to connect to the data source, point us to the data source. We take care of all the scanning infrastructure needs that you have. It's completely PaaS SaaS, so you don't have to do anything other than to just essentially pay for it. However, this is possible only for resources that we have access to. So things that are in the cloud typically fall in that bucket. But if you have data sources on premises, we typically don't have access to it. So an integration runtime is like this little piece of software that helps us connect to your data source on premises and pull the metadata back into the cloud. Scanning is done locally next to your data source on premises, so we don't pull your data into the cloud ever. We scan locally, pick all the classifications, the properties that we need, and pull that into the cloud so that you can see it within your sources, you can see it within your assets. The ability to do this scanning of data on premises or in locked out environments that are not accessible directly, that bit is called an integration runtime. Classifications helps you manage all the classifications that we're going to scan for. There are some out of the box ones that we talked about, 100 plus or so, and this list keeps increasing. And there are ones that you can define for yourself. A lot of organizations have got specific IDs, specific formats for those identifiers that they would like to put in and look for regex patterns that are well established. All that can be plugged in here and can be then scanned for. All right, I'm going to pop back out and talk about glossary for a second, because one of the values that we talked about was to help the folks looking for data do better. So what you have here is a organizational level glossary, taxonomy that is defined that can be used by the data owners, data users, data curators, data stewards within your organization. You can import those and manage those here, and then eventually actually apply them. So let's quickly look at one such term. And you can see that advisory services has a certain definition, but it tells you, for example, there are 23 assets associated with this. So you can click here and directly see the assets that have this glossary term associated. So you have this pivot to it as well. So if you want to look for all the assets that are related to advisory services, it becomes very easy to do that. Simple search function. But now you can see how your data that would have had different views, different owners, different people, all looking at the same data, but from different angles, different lenses, now get one single view, consolidated view across all of it. If you're a data and a business owner and you want to look from the glossary angle, data quality angle, you have a way to do that. If you're a security, compliance, governance, privacy, chief data officer kind of persona that wants to look at the overall data estate and gain insights into what's going on, you have that angle too. It's very powerful now that we have the ability to pull all this metadata, store it in a single place. The overall data itself, the data map, is based on Apache Atlas. That's the core store that is there. And it's all accessible via APIs too. So it's not only the UI that you have to use. You can automate a lot of things using the REST APIs that will give you access to this data. So you can query for certain classifications, look for assets, do all of that via APIs too. All right, I'm going to flip back to my presentation and finish up. Give me a sec to get that back. Give me a sec. Coming back now. Okay, hopefully we are back here. All right. So what did you see? Let's do a quick recap. One, you saw a way to bring all your data together, unify it and make it meaningful using the data map. There is scanning that goes behind all of these data sources to understand what's in there. There is lineage identification that's going on. We have a bunch of inbuilt types that we search for, plus custom ones that you can define, and then integration with Microsoft Information Protection Sensitivity labels that is the highly confidential bit. So it starts with just pointing us to the data. We take over from there and then help make data discovery automated. Next is you can do more with the data that you have found. For data users, searching and browsing, going through business glossary, looking at the lineage, looking at owners, all of that becomes so simple now. Because we know what data you have, curating that data catalog underneath becomes easy. And so you focus on enriching it with more metadata, making it more useful to your business users. For all the personas that we talked about on the security, governance, compliance, privacy side of it, we start with insights. You understand how well you are doing in terms of understanding your data estate, using your asset insights, your scan insights, when you quickly roll up to see more interesting ones that you can use, like tell me how my data estate is in terms of sensitivity of my data. Where is my sensitive data located? Very, very quick ways to understand what is going on. And again, from a very high level view down to the most granular, all that data is available. So Purview ideally is the place where you are meant to unlock that one Microsoft value. It can help organizations manage that hybrid data estate, and they can go to the distance on Microsoft data sources and more. Right? In order to promote the adoption of Purview, during public preview, customers can take advantage of a few offers. First is the scanning of your on-premises SQL servers is free. So if you are looking at your data estate on-premises and you're trying to figure out what sensitive data is in there, please do enable Purview and try this out. The scanning of your Power BI tenants is free. So the other side of it, where you have sensitive data merged together, sitting in dashboards, data sets that are available in Power BI, you want to scan that, you want to understand what is there. And again, it shows up inside Purview. There is free scanning of your Power BI tenants too. The third is if you are an M365 customer and you know about sensitivity labels, you understand that entire value proposition that we have been talking about for about 2-3 years now on the productivity side, but how classifying and labeling your data helps you do better data governance, better security. Then we have free sensitivity labeling for those existing M365 customers. So if you have E5, you can go all the way to automatic labeling and bring that over into Purview 2. Let's quickly summarize this in terms of what is actually available. You get automated scanning of your hybrid sources, classification, labeling support, and Atlas API support, Atlas being the data map core. All is available today. AWS S3 is coming up soon. Within the catalog functionality itself, you can search, browse, use business glossary, do data lineage, and even look at the connection between Purview and Synapse. This is coming soon. Purview data insights. You can see all the scans and assets that are going on, like the total number of assets and the scans that are bringing those assets in. Look at glossary, classification, and drill down all the way by sensitivity. This is all that we kind of saw in here today. So what is the call to action as we come towards the end? The core call to action is try it out. It is free for use till the end of February. The only charge is the scanning charge. So the cost of scanning, which is pretty low. So if you're just testing it out, it will really not be too high. It'll be in the order of, like, I would say less than $50 just for some trial stuff. Try it out. Give us feedback. Tell us how this would go into production. Where will we do better? So we are looking to see how we can add more resources that you care about. Make sure our roadmap caters to things that you will take to production now, and tell us things that you'd like to see overall in the product. Of course, what you've seen is just a public preview product, and this is just a start, which means this is just the start of a multi-year product roadmap. Tell us, what would you like to see first? What would you like to see next? You have more resources to go into too. All of this stuff now that is public preview means there is documentation, there are videos, you can talk to our community, you can ask questions. If you are running into problems, you can get help. There's a whole bunch of stuff there. Take advantage of it. We are all there to help you, and your journey will be more successful if you join us and help us help you. So with that, I have come to the end. I'm going to stop sharing and let's go to questions.
Thank you, Aashish. That was a fantastic talk, and you have a lot of questions. What I'll try and do to make this easier is just read them out to you one by one. Some of them might be quite similar, so you might be able to answer a couple of questions with one answer. So the first one, I'm not sure, this might be the most difficult to answer, is when will the service be GA?
Yes, it is the most difficult to answer. For all those who know how Microsoft works, we aren't allowed to talk about dates until the dates are final and available to the world. So I can't make commitments. So given that this isn't an NDA kind of setup, can't tell you when it is. But now that this is public preview, the next step is GA. So there is only one way to go towards GA.
Fantastic. Okay, so Craig says that he likes the lineage feature, but for some reason lineage isn't being picked up on self-hosted integration runtimes, and so I think the question is, should he be using Atlas REST APIs, or is there something that he's not doing to pick up the self-hosted integration runtime?
I understand the question, Craig. I've read the full question and I see it. Part of the thing is that we are still building some of the lineage capabilities on where we get those inputs from and where we see where we can like automate the process. And why you're able to do it via the Atlas REST API is the Atlas REST API allows you to add any data. So even if we are not able to pick it up, you can just add data yourself and fill in the blanks, essentially. That's why you're able to do it via the REST API. It's intended to be that. What we are able to do on our own is obviously limited by what we have released till now, and it will only get better. So the call to action here is, yes, I understand the gap. But if this is important to you, let's get you connected with the product group folks who are taking care of lineage, and let's get your voice to them and help them prioritize your specific ask. Let's figure out what the data source is, why it is not showing up, and let's see what we can do to fix it.
Great. Craig also asks if this will be available in the Swiss data centers when it's GA.
Again, can't commit it, so don't treat this as a commitment. But typically, all Azure services are required to be everywhere by the time we GA, or at least have a short roadmap to make sure we are everywhere. So I think we should be there, and we'll know when we go GA.
Fantastic. And someone wants to know what happens to organizations that are already using free Azure data catalog. I think maybe ADC 1. Are they going to be forced to upgrade?
I actually don't know this. If you're talking about the Gen 1 service, I don't know what's happening with that. There have been many iterations of this. Folks who have been part of our private preview have a whole different experience too. So let's take your question back to the product group folks and ask them, because I'm not completely sure there.
Okay. Ash wants to know if it will eventually support scanning streams such as Kafka or event hubs.
Yes, that's one of the things we want to add. The way I'm going to like deviate a little bit and answer this a little more complicated way. We think that event hubs are an interesting source of semi-structured data, which is typically if you have an event hub, the data format, the fields that are coming are pretty standard. And so what that allows you to do is do classification as a whole, like sample the events that are coming through and then build an asset that shows those sampled fields. And so it'll be a very interesting way to make sure that as your data is flowing around, we are able to capture the sensitivity of that too. It is something in our roadmap, but it is not a very high priority. There are bigger, and I want to say more persistent sources of data that we need to cover first that customers are burning on, and we need to cover those.
Got you. Okay. Then we've got a question on pricing and whether there are any plans to extend the 4C data map offer beyond February the 28th. And are there plans to introduce auto scaling to reduce costs?
So the pricing beyond 28th, I don't have visibility into. We do hear about the problem, like customers trying it out want to have, I want to say, a low cost, and obviously the production environment can be charged. We're trying to figure that out. Don't have a clear answer on how exactly we're planning to do it. From auto scaling question, there is another thing that we're looking at on how we can start smaller and therefore keep the cost low, allow you to try it out, and then allow you to scale up into production and do that. What I want to emphasize though is that if you're actually trialing it, the scanning costs are quite low in general. Unless you're like planning to scan petabytes of data, it's marginal. It's the cost of the C0, B0 stuff that you, D0, whatever that you mentioned. Yeah, that's the one that we have to figure out. But still TBD, it's something going on in the background.
Got you. Okay. Somebody asked, can you plug in your organization's Office 365, including mailboxes and OneDrives?
What we plan to do is really enrich the existing experiences where it matters. So if you see the data sources that are covered today, it's largely whatever is not Office. Office already has got rich experiences for mailboxes and OneDrive and files and stuff like that. What we're really trying to do is, if you have Office files sitting in Azure, for example, we want to connect that and make sure you can see all of that in the single view within the Office portal. I currently don't see Office data showing up inside Purview. And what we're going to try and do is make sure that you have a way to jump between the two more easily in the short term.
Okay, great. So we have, I think, two questions which are quite similar. Would companies have several Purview accounts, or is it recommended to have just one? What's the best practice?
Good question. We typically think that smaller customers will have one prod Purview account. Smaller customers will not need more than that. And I say one prod because there will be some test accounts where you're trialing stuff and things like that, which I'm not counting, but one main prod account. Then comes larger organizations. Larger organizations are the X factor here. You may have multiple Purview accounts depending on geography, depending on how loosely coupled the organization is in terms of business units. Those kind of factors will determine how many Purview accounts are there. How some customers interpret regulations will also impact number of Purview accounts created. So we are aware of all of that, and a few customers have told us already that they will not have just one. But there are smaller customers who are like, yeah, it doesn't seem like we need more than one. So you're going to see the entire range. You should just be prepared for it. There was a prequel sort of to that question that says, is Azure Data Explorer available? Yes, it is. You should try it out.
Fantastic. And I think you also answered Joe's question, which is Purview limited to one per tenant like data catalog? No, which it isn't.
Yes, it's a key problem that we fixed. The first one per tenant thing has gone away. Yeah.
Excellent. So we've got another question. Is access controlled via RBAC and Azure policies?
We have certain specific Purview roles that have been created. You should go explore that. It's in the documentation. You can assign that via Azure. They are standard Azure AD roles. So you can assign that to people, and then they should be able to access the portal and do activities. So you assign it in Azure AD, come and then use it in the Azure Purview portal.
Okay, great. Well, I'll try and fly through these quite quickly because literally every time you answer a question, a new one appears. Are there connectors for ERP products such as Dynamics 365, Workday, and Salesforce?
Some of these are planned. I can't talk about when, but they're in the roadmap. A quick thing, I can stick around for another 10-15 minutes, keep answering questions until we exhaust it, and I have time.
Thanks, Aashish. I appreciate that because we've still got quite a few questions. So thank you. Thanks for the extra time. Prashan asks, what if we have data in Oracle databases? How does that scan the data?
Okay, so like any database, our first job is to connect to it, and connecting to it is, I'm going to take the SQL example. There is a connection string that you use, and that's how you get access. You need permissions on the database so that the service principal can actually read the data. So all of those very obvious things need to be done. Same for what applies to SQL will apply to Oracle too. We need a way to read the data, connection string plus permissions. That is the how to connect. And what actually happens is we end up sampling data. So I think this is the important bit for any structured data that is there, whether it's in a database or it's a standard format that you store in a CSV file. Anything that has a fixed, well-defined format can be sampled rather than read fully. So if you have a really large database with millions of rows, yes, we are not going to be reading millions of rows. That would be really weird for us to do because the data in the column is exactly the same across millions of rows from a format point of view. And so when we are doing pattern recognition, type recognition, we just need, I want to say, a few hundred of them. And then that will give us the high confidence on what that pattern is. We don't need to read all 100 million rows. So sampling is what we do with structured data, keep the costs of scanning low and the impact to your production environment low. You're not reading millions, you're reading few hundreds. So I answered a totally random question, but I thought it was valid in the context of talking about structured data.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I remember trying that myself on an S3 source, which in Amazon. Which of course is sort of cross cloud, so it does it tries not to take that much data out the cloud when it does the scanning. So I thought that was quite a good approach. Brian is asking, I'll just try and compress his questions. He's asking about the best deployment approach to, I think, automating the addition of data sources to Purview.
That's a great question. Yes. So I knew this question would come sometime because I talked about the entire data estate, and the obvious question was, how do you get the entire data estate? I can't talk more about this just yet. What I can tell you is that we are actively working to solve this. This is one of those NDA things that we haven't fully released, so can't talk about it in a public forum. But yes, we act the problem that if you want to automate and scale out the addition of data sources to Purview and the scanning of it and things like that, you need to plug into policy. You need other ways to drive this. And we are working on 2-3 ways to do that. I think when we are close to talking about it, we're ready to release it into public preview would be a better time. But thank you for the question. It is a brilliant question. Can't talk to you about it right now.
Excellent. So Craig asks if there's a way to use sensitivity labels without needing to use Office 365.
Today, no. You need at least one Office 365 license to get labels, because the labels store and the labels come from the Office 365 side. What we are doing is we are reusing it within Purview so that you don't have to create a copy of it and maintain 2 different versions and things like that. One central place where you define your labels, and then you kind of use it wherever you want. So if you don't have Office 365 as in terms of the productivity suite for individual users, you can still get a single license and turn it on, and that will do the work for you, like in terms of getting the UI and the admin interface to configure labels.
Okay, great. And Prashan asks about time slots, I think avoiding scheduling to avoid scanning performance issues.
I believe there are specific time slots that are available. I'm just checking that out for a second, and I can see that. Give me a second, and I'll share my screen. Hang on, I'm just figuring this out. Give me a sec. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen now. If you can see this, this is me setting up a scan for my storage account. You can do a one-time scan, or you can do a recurring scan, and you can, for example, put it every week, and you can tell it to start at a specific time UTC. So you can schedule it for off-peak hours if that's what we were looking for.
Brilliant. Okay, slowly we're getting through this list. I think honestly, Aashish, you've been a big hit, because this is the most questions that I've ever seen in any of our sessions. Question: can we capture data quality aspects of a registered data set?
This is a question slightly out of my zone of knowledge. The reason I did not cover glossary in such great depth is that I don't know much about how data quality is done. And so what I can do is I can connect you to the right folks on our team who are subject matter experts about data quality. That's the best I can do right now.
Okay, right. Manny asks, how will Purview scans get affected if there's blob storage encounters and auto failover, maybe transient faults or something like that?
Great question. I don't think we have documented how that interaction behaves. However, our access to the blob storage account is through, again, a service principal accessing the storage account URL. So fundamentally, since the URL won't change, even if under the covers a data center changes and stuff like that, it should be fine. But given that we haven't done a failover actively and tried that out, it's a good question for me to double check. From what I know, it should not impact anything. The way we connect is a little different. We don't connect to the data center. We connect from the storage access layer. So you should be abstracted from those things.
Okay, fantastic. So Craig has offered his email address, which I can forward to you, Aashish, which and says that he's happy to talk about their use case to the product team.
Right. This is for the lineage one, right? I'm guessing.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. So Rob asks, is Azure Virtual Network supported?
We do have. We have started to look at this both from where Purview is placed, as in the VNet in which Purview is placed, and VNets for the data sources that we are going to scan. So for example, if you have data sources behind a blocked off VNet and you need to get access to it, we have a way to do that, and that's on one more integration runtime thing that we'll have to dive into. It's a topic for a completely different topic. It'll take its own time. So yes, both the VNet aspects are getting covered, where Purview gets placed and where data sources get placed. Deep topic, we need to take it offline.
Okay. There's still quite a number of questions. I'm just going to cherry pick a couple. I'm sorry, everybody.
No, go for it. No, go for it. I'm here.
Okay,
let's keep
fantastic.
Going.
So somebody says this looks better than Azure Information Protection Scanner that works on on-prem file servers. A great use case would be connecting a file server to Purview, then using the insights to decide whether it migrates to Azure Blob, Azure Files, or SharePoint.
So thanks for the plug to AIP. And yes, what we have, let me take a customer scenario rather than talk about the product here. What we have found is that Azure, not Azure, on-prem file shares are used for both user data. This is like people like you and me storing files in there, and as a backend store for applications. So applications read and write files of the from the share. Um, the the share itself, is looking at the share, you're not able to distinguish whether it is application kind of data and therefore should go to Azure Files as the backend, or it is user kind of data and should migrate to SharePoint. So for those wondering what that context was, that's the customer scenario. And the goal, of course, is to get rid of all your on-prem infrastructure that you're managing for file shares, go to two SaaS offerings that can do all the scale out and storage and all of that for you. And yes, the AIP scanner would be the perfect tool to help determine that. Thank you for the scenario. Until it becomes live, I can't tell you whether we're working on it or not. Suffice to say, I know about this scenario.
Excellent. So Danish is asking, do we need to install an agent on virtual machines to scan?
If you're scanning things inside a virtual machine, yeah, absolutely. If there is a way to connect to the data that's sitting inside a virtual machine via some URL or some ODBC connect that you have opened up, some port that we can access via that's opened up on the VM already, then we can do that. Short of that, if there is no way to access the data in the VM other than to be inside the VM, then absolutely you need an agent. That agent is what we call the self-host integration runtime. Integration runtime bit that I said, it's its own topic of discussion. Yeah, that. So yes, absolutely.
Okay. So Joe's asked about the self-host integration runtime. I think maybe there was a little confusion with the Data Factory integration runtime. He wants to know whether there's any relationship between.
There is actually. We picked the concept of the integration runtime from Data Factory. And yeah, if you're familiar with the ADF integration runtime concept and how it works and what are the limitations or like features, functionalities there, yeah, it's similar. And so if you wanted access to data to use with ADF, it's the same as you want access to data to use with Azure Purview. Technically the same concept, get access to the data.
Okay, brilliant. And I think last question, is it possible to specify different types of run as accounts for different runs? And if so, can it be automated?
Oh, no. If I understand the question correctly,
can you run under different service principles, I guess is the question.
Yes, that's what I figured. No, the Purview service principle is one. Sorry. There is one service principle that essentially comes out of each Purview instance that you create. If you create two different Purview accounts, yes, then there are two different essentially service principles that you can use. You can't use one Purview account with two different service principles. Yeah, no, that scenario doesn't happen.
Okay, fantastic. Aashish, if you could just indulge me just for a couple more minutes, I'm going to put you on the spot just to ask a question. Because yes. I've got a couple of licenses, JetBrains licenses that I want to give away. So the first two people to publish and answer this question, just put your email in there and I'll send you a license. So Aashish, please ask a question about any of tonight's content.
Okay. I may have mentioned this in passing, but it's all there somewhere. If you've been paying attention, it will come through. What is the one non-Azure multi-cloud resource that we support today? I'm not talking on-prem, but a multi-cloud resource that's not Azure. There's one that we support today. What is that one that we support?
I guess we'll see who's the quickest here. I'm waiting with bated breath. We'll give it a minute. Okay, so we've got 2 answers straight away of AWS S3.
That is correct.
Okay, fantastic. So Denesh and Craig, if you could just send me your, oh, you have. Craig, if you could send me your email again. I know that you want me to pass this on to Aashish anyway for a product team interaction with your use case. Fantastic. Okay. Well, listen, thank you so much, Aashish. I think it was a fantastic talk. And like I say, I've never, since we started these virtual events, never had so much engagement from the audience. So it's been brilliant.
I'm happy to be here, and looks like we had a great audience with folks who are familiar with this stuff, which is always a pleasure to then interact and engage with. Thank you for your questions. Some of you, I think, already know our roadmap, so are very well prepared for everything that I was saying and talking about. But thank you for joining and supporting us.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next month.